Well, no real surprises from Michigan on the GOP side as former President Donald Trump chalked up another primary win against his only real competition for the nomination, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Trump did obliterate her by nearly 20 points last night, showing he is still firmly in control of vast swaths of the GOP base. That said, some outlets did point out that even with his dominant victory in Michigan, Trump has been seeming maybe to slightly underperform the polls against Nikki Haley. Per the New York Times in Iowa, the final 538 polling average showed Trump leading Nikki Haley by 34 points with a 53% share. He ultimately beat her by 32 points and a 51% share. In New Hampshire, he led by 18 points with 54%, but in the end won by just 11 points with 54% in South Carolina. Now, Mr. Trump led by 28 points with 62% in that state, ultimately winning by 20 points with 60%. So slightly different numbers versus the actual polling. Nikki Haley didn't take Trump's latest victory lying down. The former UN ambassador told the Wall Street Journal yesterday that nominating Trump would be, quote, suicide, adding, "We've got to realize that if we don't have someone who can win a general election, all we are doing is caving to the socialist left." While Haley said she feared a Trump nomination, she did affirm that she saw President Joe Biden as far more dangerous than Donald Trump. Haley also had some thoughts on the shakeup at the RNC. Take a listen.
Look at what's happening at the RNC. The idea that they would be choosing a chair and a director before a primary is over is a massive control move by Donald Trump. The idea that there is a resolution out there in the RNC saying Donald Trump can't use the RNC for his legal slush fund, and he's upset that that was proposed, tells you everything you need to know. The idea that those now moving into the RNC are saying the RNC is only going to be about Donald Trump, you can hang up House, you can hang up Senate, and the rest of the ticket. It is now becoming, the Republican Party is now becoming Donald Trump's playpen.
Meanwhile, an update on the former president's legal troubles. A former attorney to Nathan Wade took the stand Tuesday in the Fulton County election interference case, where he told the court several times he could not recall specific information regarding District Attorney Fani Willis and Nathan Wade's relationship. Both are prosecutors in the litigation against Donald Trump. Bradley appeared to contradict himself, however, later acknowledging texts do exist. Defense attorney Ashley Merchant revealed Bradley told her via text he believed the Willis-Wade relationship started before she hired him. Trump lawyer Steve Sadow pressed Bradley about the timeline, too. Bradley responded that he was just speculating about Willis and Wade.
But it seems like yet more of a paper trail that the relationship began earlier than they let on, that they were in fact already in a relationship when she hired him to do the job of prosecuting the case. Remember, we also have testimony from one of her friends. Now we have these text messages. It seems it's just getting increasingly clear. I don't know how they can still deny it. Neither here nor there for the actual legal merits of the case against Trump, but a pretty damning situation for Fani Willis and Nathan Wade, which, you know, continues to, I think, interest everyone just because it's a little bit of salaciousness. And also, if you care about the case against Donald Trump, you might be frustrated that someone who, by all accounts, is underqualified was put in that position, potentially because he was dating the woman who got to pick that job.
The strategic bungle here from Democrats is outrageous. We're all talking about the did they, didn't they of a private, salacious affair instead of the trial, which is about the question of whether or not Donald Trump conspired to try to overturn the election results by submitting a knowingly fake slate of electors that could be generate enough ambiguity to throw the election to the House instead of letting the people of America decide.
Remember she gave that interview saying you should vote for her because she wouldn't sleep with her employees.
Yes, and you know, and that's all very funny, but I don't want to participate in the asymmetry here where two wrongs don't make a right. The fact of Fani Willis allegedly putting her own personal issues before the case here and engaging in choices and bad decision-making that is ultimately imperiling the case should not prevent us from being able to say clearly what the case was about, because the American people would have had an opportunity to decide, to vote on whether or not they actually want to support Donald Trump as president on the basis of whether or not a court does or does not find him guilty of these very serious allegations. And because of Fani Willis's alleged indiscretions, the public might not get a chance to know, and Donald Trump might not have a chance to be exonerated before Election Day. And that's a serious issue.
And that brings us back to the top, because it's part of the argument Nikki Haley is making for her continued candidacy. It would be reckless, it would be suicide to pick Donald Trump to go up against Joe Biden. And she can point to polls in her favor that show not that it is impossible for Donald Trump to defeat Joe Biden, and in fact, polls of Trump versus Biden show him right now winning the election if it were held today. The entrance of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the inclusion of him in those polls, actually only makes it more likely Donald Trump would prevail. So she can't make the argument that Trump can't win or won't win. He has before, and he clearly could again. However, she polls much better against Biden than Donald Trump himself does, and that continues to be the reason for her candidacy. There aren't enough people, frankly, in the Republican Party who are hearing that. Some are. She continues to do all right in some of these contests. I was actually in Michigan last weekend because I'm from there. I was visiting some family. I was on the west part of the side. And, it is true. I know a lot of people who I come from a Republican family. I know a lot of Republican voters who are deeply dissatisfied with Trump and would happily vote for any non-Trump candidate and are having a real hard time at the idea of stomaching Trump once again. These are the kind of voters Nikki Haley speaks for. They exist. There are a lot of them. There aren't enough of them for her to win the nomination, unfortunately. And I think that's pretty crystal clear at this point.
It is interesting to me that the electability argument doesn't seem to be as persuasive with Republicans as it has been with Democrats.
Republicans are an unruly sort. They won't listen to this.
Nikki Haley is, according to a poll from I think a couple of days ago, as reported by The Hill, has a 13-point lead over Joe Biden. Now, this was a poll from earlier this month. A 13-point lead over Biden. I mean, that is really conclusive and kind of confidence-inspiring if you live in a world where you think winning is the most important thing. But it does seem to be the case that the framing is very different on the Republican side of the aisle versus Democrats. Democrats are painting this as an existential threat, a threat to democracy. Stopping Donald Trump is the highest of priorities, going so far as to say that everyone should turn away and not be concerned about the genocide happening over your shoulder, what has been described as a plausible genocide happening over your shoulder, because the most important thing is to stop Donald Trump. Republicans have a different sort of thinking here, and I do wonder if the possibility of Trump losing ever enters into the conversation as to whether or not people should be paying more attention to Haley.
Donald Trump vowed that if you backed him, you'd get tired of winning. And maybe they are tired of winning. There is something to just being the permanent opposition that seems to delight a lot of conservatives, having Democrats to rail against. I don't know. There's also so much frustration on the Republican side. I know there is on the Democratic side as well, but Republicans hate their leadership, hate the agendas of the people who run the party, despise Mitch McConnell, have changed their speaker very quickly, historically in an unprecedented fashion because of their dissatisfaction with leadership choices. I think some Republican voters feel like, fine, we're more likely to win with somebody who's not Trump, but if we get that person, are they going to actually implement the policies we want? Absolutely not. They promised it a million times and they never do it. We're going to stick with Trump even if he's more likely to lose, because Trump has convinced them that he and he alone will deliver on these issues. Now, I think there's a lot of counter arguments you can make. He was the president. Did he deliver on all those things you wanted? But that is, for better or worse, the perspective of a lot of conservative primary
What about
voters.
Nikki Haley's argument that he's a down-ballot disaster? That seemed to bear out in some ways in the midterm results last time around. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's, again, true. There's little doubt that Trump's involvement in the Pennsylvania Senate race, it was Trump's endorsement of Dr. Oz that catapulted him over a more reasonable candidate in a very close election. He compelled, the same thing happened in Georgia. In Arizona, he compelled the Senate candidate, Blake Masters, to take much firmer election denial positions to make that the main thrust of the campaign. Ended up losing that race by razor-thin margins. Similar story in Nevada. So his effect on the party really has not been good since 2016 when he did win. But this argument has just not proved persuasive at all to enough Republicans.
Did you see any political ads when you were in Michigan from Haley or Trump?
I got texts from Haley every 5 seconds.
And were these the kind of arguments that she was making?
Yes, absolutely. That's the argument she's making. And you can't say it's going nowhere. It's just not going enough to get her the nomination.
Yeah. I am seeing how many people have unsuccessfully challenged Trump and have done so much worse than Nikki Haley. There is a part of me that is interested in how successful she has been. But of course, you're right. She's nowhere near where she needs to be. Stick around. We'll continue giving you all the news you need to know right after this.